We are going to be hearing quite a bit about North Carolina's economy. It's doing great, or North Carolina's economy, it's doing poorly. What should we know about how North Carolina's economy's been performing?
Well, that's a great question, the way you phrased it, Mitch, because North Carolina is doing great or North Carolina is doing poorly are both defensible statements. Here's what I mean. We'll start with the latter one. North Carolina's economy is doing poorly. That's actually true compared to usual economic recoveries in the past. In other words, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the period after previous significant recessions, North Carolina had a stronger economic recovery than we are now experiencing. Of course, that's true for the whole country. So when we say North Carolina is doing poorly, that's accurate if we understand it in the context of the entire country as a whole has a relatively weak economic recovery since the Great Recession when you compare it against the recoveries in the past. We've had a lower rate of growth, a lower rate of wage growth. We've had a lot of months of expansion of the economy, a fairly lengthy recovery under President Obama, but it's been weak. It's been relatively weak. North Carolina has not escaped that. Compared to the historical past, North Carolina's economy is weak. Now, probably the more reasonable question to ask in state politics is, okay, that might be true for the country as a whole, but how is North Carolina doing itself compared to the rest of the country? So if you stipulate that the economic recovery for America is relatively weak, how does North Carolina rank or compare within that context? We rank really well. In other words, North Carolina's performance is outdoing the national average and the Southeast average in virtually every way. If you look at data from, let's say, mid-2013. I choose that time because that's when the first budget that the current governor, Pat McCrory, signed, that's when that was passed. That's when the legislature enacted tax reform in a big way, regulatory reform, changes to the unemployment insurance system, and a variety of other policies. So mid-2013 is a reasonable starting point. If you look at that period to now, North Carolina's job growth has been larger than the national average. And this is the net number of jobs. So some companies gain, some companies lose. The net effect in North Carolina is larger than most other states, larger than most other southern states. The same is true for per capita income growth. If you take the total amount of income and you divide by the number of people and you track that over time, North Carolina does better. I wouldn't say it does dramatically better. It's a little bit better than the national and regional averages. The biggest measure, the broadest measure, is called gross domestic product. That's basically the economy, the total sum of goods and services produced. And when you look at that, North Carolina's GDP growth has, again, exceeded the average nationally, regionally. It's I think, number 10 or number 11 during the period I mentioned. So one of the top-performing, top-growing economies in the United States. Again, we all wish it was stronger because we wish the American economy was doing better. But North Carolina is doing comparatively well. And politically, that's really the most relevant statement. No one's going to hold a governor or a legislator or a local official responsible for international trade or the Federal Reserve or national policy. So you're really just looking at how does North Carolina compare to other perhaps similarly situated states. And we compare pretty well.
We are chatting with John Locke Foundation Chairman John Hood. And John, this is obviously going to be cropping up again and again, especially in the race for governor, because Governor McCrory will be running on his record. Roy Cooper, the Democratic candidate, will be challenging Governor McCrory on the record. When we hear from Cooper and his campaign that, oh, you're hearing the good news, but they aren't telling you about these pieces of the economy, when you hear them pick out particular pieces of the economy to criticize North Carolina about or to criticize McCrory about, what should people be listening for to know what the truth is?
Well, there are a couple of notes that I would give people to interpret any political statement, but whether it's from Governor McCrory or Attorney General Cooper. The first thing to think about is dates. So I just told you why I chose the middle of 2013 as the correct starting point. If you were going to potentially assess the effects of state policy, you'd want to assess it after the policies are enacted, not before. Lots of tricks are used. For example, you might look at the 2015 numbers in North Carolina and compare them 10 years earlier. I see a lot of claims that Democrats make against McCrory. Well, over the last 10 years, of course, most of those years were under Democratic governors, so that's a misleading way to do it. They do that a lot with teacher pay also. They say, well, over the last 10 years. That might be important information to know as a North Carolinian. It's not politically relevant because it includes a lot of years before the current incumbent governor or legislators were in power. That's one thing. The other thing to know is you can find a measure. There are so many different ways to think about the economy and people's lives and people's incomes and their standard of living that you will almost never find a scenario where everything looks good. There will always be people, even in a healthy economy, who lose jobs, whose wages don't grow, whose opportunities are limited. That's been true ever since we've been measuring the economy. So I would not be at all surprised if the Attorney General, Roy Cooper, or other supporters of his come up with some correct statements to describe the economy that don't make North Carolina look as good because there are so many different measures. What I would just tell you is that most of the standard measures, how many jobs are created, what's the unemployment rate, adjusted for a variety of factors like people's willingness to go out and look for jobs, or incomes or GDP. Most of those measures show better growth under McCrory than has been true in most states. I'm not going to say that's true in every single instance, but that's something for voters and North Carolinians to think about. It is a complex story. You can always come up with a variety of different takes on the story, but the general consensus story that is accurate is that North Carolina has been outperforming the national and southeastern averages. Now, you don't have to say McCrory is responsible for that. You could say, well, in spite of Governor McCrory's policies or the legislature's policies, North Carolina is doing better. You can make an argument like that, but beware of anyone who says North Carolina is underperforming, is not doing as well as other states. That's probably a stretch there.
In the brief time that we have remaining, just how important is the economy going to be in this particular race?
I think it's the number one issue. I think it's what most people are thinking about most of the time, and particularly when it comes to undecided voters. There still are swing voters. They still matter. Sometimes they split their tickets. They vote Democrat for some races and Republican for other races. While many voters care passionately about social issues or other kinds of issues, highly emotional issues, those voters are usually already on one team or the other team. They're not usually the ones who are up for grabs. The ones who are up for grabs typically think about their political choices from the context of how will this affect me, my life, my standard of living, my job, my opportunity to get ahead.